Hi guys, let's start part 1 of chapter 3, that is Nazism and the rise of Hitler. In the spring of 1945, a little 11-year-old German boy called Helmut was laying in bed when he overheard his parents discussing something in serious tones. His father, a prominent physician, deliberated with his wife whether the time had come to kill the entire family, or if he should commit suicide alone. His father spoke about his fear of revenge, saying how the Allies will do to us what we did to the crippled and Jews. The next day he took Helmuth to the woods, where they spent their last happy time together, singing old children's songs. Later, Helmut's father shot himself in his office. Helmut remembers that he saw his father's bloody uniform being burnt in the family fireplace. So traumatized was he by what he had overheard and what had happened that he reacted by refusing to eat at home for the following 9 years. He was afraid that his mother might poison him. Okay, so he was afraid. Although Helmut may not have realized all that is meant, his father has been a Nazi and a supporter of Adolf Hitler. Many of you will know something about the Nazis and Hitler. You probably know of Hitler's determination to make Germany into a mighty power and his ambition of conquering all of Europe. You may have heard that he killed Jews, but Nazism was not one or two isolated acts. It was a system, a structure of ideas about the world and politics. Let us try and understand what Nazism was all about. Let us see why Helmut's father killed himself and what the basis of his fear was. In May 1945, Germany surrendered to the Allies. Anticipating what was coming, Hitler, his propaganda minister Goebbels, and his entire family committed suicide collectively in his Berlin bunker in April. So what happens was that in May 1945, Germany surrendered to the Allies. Anticipating what was coming, Hitler and his propaganda minister, Goebbels, and his entire family committed suicide collectively in his Berlin bunker in April. At the end of the war, an international military tribunal at Nuremberg was set up to prosecute Nazi war criminals for crimes against peace, for war crimes and crimes against humanity. Germany's conduct during the war, especially those acts which came to be called crimes against humanity, raised serious moral and ethical questions and invited worldwide condemnation. What were these acts? So we have a figure. Okay, here's an image of Hitler center and Goebbels left, living after an official meeting 1932. So, new words. We have got allies. The Allied powers were initially led by the UK and France. In 1941, they were joined by the USSR and USA. They fought against the Axis powers, namely Germany, Italy, and Japan. Under the shadow of the Second World War, Germany had waged a genocidal war, which resulted in the mass murder of selected groups of innocent civilians of Europe. The number of people killed included 6 million Jews. So they killed 6 million Jews, 200,000 gypsies, 1 million Polish civilians, 70,000 Germans who were considered mentally and physically disabled, besides innumerable political opponents. Nazis devised an unprecedented means of killing people, that is, by gassing them in various killing centers like Auschwitz. The Nuremberg Tribunal sentenced only 11 leading Nazis to death. Many others were imprisoned for life. The retribution did come, yet the punishment of the Nazis was far short of the brutality and extent of their crimes. The Allies did not want to be as harsh on defeated Germany as they had been after the First World War. Everyone came to feel that the rise of Nazi Germany could be partly traced back to the German experience at the end of the First World War. Okay, so everyone came to feel that the rise of Nazi Germany could be partly traced back to the German experience in the end of the First World War. So, what was this experience? Then we have genocidal, killing on large scale, leading to destruction of large sections of people. Birth of the Weimar Republic. Germany, a powerful empire in the early years. Germany, a powerful empire in the early years of the 20th century, fought the First World War from 1914 to 1918 alongside the Austrian Empire and against the Allies, that is England, France, and Russia. All joined the war enthusiastically, hoping to gain from a quick victory. Little did they realize that the war would stretch on, eventually draining Europe of all its resources. Germany made initial gains by occupying France and Belgium. However, the Allies, strengthened by the US entry in 1917, won, defeating Germany and the Central Powers in November 1918. The defeat of Imperial Germany and the abdication of the Emperor gave an opportunity to parliamentary parties to recast German polity. A National Assembly met at Weimar and established a democratic constitution with a federal structure. Deputies were now elected to the German parliament, or Riksdag, on the basis of equal and universal votes cast by all adults, including women. This republic, however, was not received well by its own people, largely because of the terms it was forced to accept after Germany's defeat at the end of the First World War. This republic, however, was not received well by its own people, largely because of the terms it was forced to accept after Germany's defeat at the end of the First World War. The peace treaty at Versailles with the Allies was a harsh and humiliating peace. Harsh and humiliating peace. So here's a figure 2. Germany after the Versailles Treaty. You can see in this map the parts of the territory that Germany lost after the treaty. So we can see here the map of Germany. Germany lost its overseas colonies, a tenth of its population, 13% of its territories, 75% of its iron, and 26% of its coal to France, Poland, Denmark, and Lithuania. So Germany lost its overseas colonies, a tenth of its population, 13% of its territories, 75% of its iron, and 26% of its coal to France, Poland, Denmark, and Lithuania. The Allied powers demilitarized Germany to weaken its power. The War Guilt Clause. The War Guilt Clause held Germany responsible for the war and damages the Allied countries suffered. Germany was forced to pay compensation amounting to £6 billion. The Allied armies also occupied the resource-rich Rhineland for much of the 1920s. Many Germans held the new Weimar Republic responsible for not only the defeat in the war, but the disgrace at Versailles. 1.1 The effect of the war. The war had devastating impact on the entire continent, both psychologically and financially. From a continent of creditors, Europe turned into one of debtors. Unfortunately, the infant Weimar Republic was being made to pay for the sins of the old empire. The Republic carried the burden of war guilt and national humiliation and was financially crippled by being forced to pay compensation. Those who supported the Weimar Republic, mainly socialists, Catholics, and Democrats, became easy targets of attack in the conservative nationalist circles. They were mockingly called the November criminals. This mindset had a major impact on the political development of the early 1930s, as we will soon see. The First World War left a deep imprint on European society and polity. Soldiers came to be placed above civilian. Politicians and publicists laid great stress on the need for men to be aggressive, strong, and masculine. The media glorified trench life. The truth, however, was that soldiers lived miserable lives in these trenches, trapped with rats feeding on corpses. They faced poisonous gas and enemy shelling and witnessed their ranks reduce rapidly. Aggressive war propaganda and national honor occupied center stage in the public sphere. While popular support grew for conservative dictatorship that had recently come into being, democracy was indeed a young and fragile idea which could not survive the instabilities and interwar Europe. 1.2 Political radicalism and economic crisis. The birth of the Weimar Republic coincided with the revolutionary uprising of the Spartacist League on the pattern of the Bolshevik Revolution in Russia. Soviets of workers and sailors were established in many cities. So here is a figure. This is a rally organized by the radical group known as the Spartacist League. In the winter of 1918-1919, the streets of Berlin were taken over by the people. Political demonstrations became common. The political atmosphere in Berlin was charged with demands for Soviet-style governance. So they demanded what? Soviet-style governance. Those opposed to this, such as the Socialist, Democrats and Catholics, met in Weimar to give shape to the Democratic Republic. The Weimar Republic crushed the uprising with the help of a war veterans organization called Free Corps. The anguished Spartacists later founded the Communist Party of Germany. Communist and socialist henceforth became irreconcilable enemies and could not make common cause against Hitler. So communist and the socialist, they became irreconcilable enemies and could not make common cause against Hitler. Both revolutionaries and militant nationalists carved for radical solutions. Then we have political radicalization was only heightened by the economic crisis of 1923. Germany had fought the war largely on loans and had to pay war reparations in gold. So reparation make up for a wrong done. Then this depleted gold reserves at a time resources were scarce, so depleted, reduce, or empty out. In 1923, Germany refused to pay, and the French occupied its leading industrial area, Ruhr, to claim their coal. So what happened in 1923 was that Germany refused to pay and the French occupied its leading industrial area, Ruhr, to claim their coal. Germany retaliated with passive resistance and printed paper currency recklessly. With too much printed money in circulation, the value of German mark fell. In April, the US dollar was equal to 24,000 marks. In July, 353,000 marks. In August, 4,621,000 marks. And at 98,860,000 marks by December, the figure had run into trillions. Okay, so they started printing paper currency, and this led to the fall in the prices of the German mark. So it fall in the value of $1 being equal to trillion marks. So we have got figure 4. Baskets and carts being loaded at a bank in Berlin with paper currency for wage payment. 1923. The German mark had so little value that vast amounts had to be used even for small payments. Okay. And here's figure 5, homeless man queuing up for a night's shelter, 1923. As the value of the mark collapsed, prices of goods soared. So the prices soared. The image of Germans carrying cartloads of currency notes to buy a loaf of bread was widely publicized, evoking worldwide sympathy. This crisis came to be known as hyperinflation, a situation when prices rise phenomenally high. Eventually, the Americans intervened and bailed Germany out of the crisis by introducing the Dawes Plan, which reworked the terms of reparation to ease the financial burden on Germans. So, US, the Americans, they came to the rescue and they helped Germans by introducing Dawes Plan. 1.3 The Years of Depression. The years between 1924 and 1928 saw some stability, yet this was built on sand. German investments and industrial recovery were totally dependent on short-term loans, largely from the USA. So German investments and industrial recovery were totally dependent on short-term loans, largely from the USA. This support was withdrawn when the Wall Street Exchange crashed in 1929. Fearing a fall in prices, people made frantic efforts to sell their shares. On one single day, 24th October, 13 million shares were sold. This was the start of the Great Economic Depression. Over the next 3 years, between 1929 and 1932, the national income of the USA fell by half. Factories shut down, exports fell, farmers were badly hit, and speculators withdrew their money from the market. The effects of this recession in the US economy were felt worldwide. The German economy was the worst hit by the economic crisis. So they depended on the US. German economy was the worst hit by the economic crisis. By 1932, industrial production was reduced to 40% of the 1929 level. Workers lost their jobs or were paid reduced wages. The number of unemployed touched an unprecedented 6 million. On the streets of Germany, you could see men with placards around their necks saying willing to do any work. Unemployed youths played cards or simply sat at street corners or desperately queued up at the local employment exchange. As jobs disappeared, the youth took to criminal activities and total despair became commonplace. The economic crisis created deep anxiety and fears in people. The middle classes, especially salaried employees and pensioners, saw their savings diminish when the currency lost its value. Small businessmen, the self employed, and retailers suffered as their businesses got ruined. So we have a figure 6. Sleeping on the line during the Great Depression, the unemployed could not hope for either wage or shelter. On winter nights, when they wanted a shelter over their head, they had to pay to sleep like this. Wall Street Exchange, the name of the world's biggest stock exchange located in the USA. These sections of society were filled with the fear of proletarianization. So they were filled with the fear of proletarianization. So proletarianization. So what is this proletarianization? To become impoverished to the level of working classes, and anxiety of being reduced to the ranks of the working class, or worse still, the unemployed. Only organized workers could manage to keep their heads above water, but unemployment weakened their bargaining power. Big business was in crisis. So even the big business was in crisis. The large mass of peasantry was affected by a sharp fall in agricultural prices, and women unable to fill their children's stomachs were filled with a sense of deep despair. Politically, too, the Weimar Republic was fragile. The Weimar Constitution had some inherent defects, which made it unstable and vulnerable to dictatorship. One was proportional representation. This made achieving a victory by any one party a near impossible task, leading to a rule by coalitions. So, proportional representation, and this made achieving majority by any one party a near impossible task, leading to a rule by coalitions. Another defect was Article 48, which gave the president the powers to impose emergency, suspend civil rights, and rule by decree. Within its short life, the Weimar Republic saw 20 different cabinets lasting on an average 239 days, and a liberal use of Article 48. Yet the crisis could not be managed. People lost confidence in the democratic parliamentary system, which seemed to offer no solutions. So people lost faith in the Weimar Republic. Then, so Hitler's rise to power. This crisis in the economy, polity, and society formed the background to Hitler's rise to power. So, born in 1889 in Austria, Hitler spent his youth in poverty. When the First World War broke out, he enrolled for the army, acted as a messenger in the front, became a corporal, and earned medals for bravery. The German defeat horrified him, and the Versailles Treaty made him furious. In 1919, he joined a small group called the German Workers' Party. He subsequently took over the organization and renamed it the National Socialist German Workers' Party. This party came to be known as the Nazi Party. So the another name of Nazi Party is National Socialist German Workers' Party. In 1923, Hitler planned to seize control of Bavaria, march to Berlin, and capture power. He failed, was arrested, tried for treason, and later released. The Nazis could not effectively mobilize popular support till the early 1930s. Till the 1930s, they didn't have popular support. So it was during the Great Depression that Nazism became a mass movement. As we have seen, after the 1929 banks collapsed, businesses shut down, workers lost their jobs, and the middle class were threatened with destitution. In such a situation, Nazi propaganda stirred hopes of a better future. So they gave hope. In 1928, the Nazi Party got no more than 2.6% votes in the Riksdag, the German parliament. By 1932, it had become the largest party with 37% votes. We have a figure 7, Hitler being greeted by the party Congress in Nuremberg in 1938. So, what's the meaning of the word propaganda? Specific type of message directly aimed at influencing the opinion of people through the use of posters, films, speeches, etc. So we have another figure 8, Nuremberg Rally, 1936. Rallies like this were held every year. An important aspect of these was the demonstration of Nazi power as various organizations paraded past Hitler, swore loyalty, and listened to his speeches. Hitler was a powerful speaker. So Hitler was a powerful speaker. His passion and his words moved people. So his words and his passion, they could move people, and people believed him, and people were hopeful by his words. He promised to build a strong nation, undo the injustice of the Versailles Treaty, and restore the dignity of the German people. So the people were very much hurt by the outcome of the First World War, and so he promised to restore the dignity of the German people. He promised employment for those looking for work and a secure future for the youth. He promised to weed out, all foreign influences and resist all foreign conspiracies against Germany. So he was a powerful speaker, and he has a way with words, and he promised many things which gave the German people hope for a brighter future. Hitler devised a new style of politics. He understood the significance of rituals and spectacle in mass mobilization. Nazis held massive rallies and public meetings to demonstrate the support for Hitler and instill a sense of unity among the people. So we have a figure 9, Hitler addressing SA and SS columns. Notice the sweeping and straight columns of people. Such photographs were intended to show the grandeur and power of the Nazi movement. The red banners with the swastika. The red banners with the swastika, the Nazi salute, and the ritualized rounds of applause after the speeches were all part of this spectacle of power. Nazi propaganda skillfully projected Hitler as a messiah, that is, a savior, as someone who had arrived to deliver people from their distress. It is an image that captured the imagination of a people whose sense of dignity and pride had been shattered and who were living in a time of acute economic and political crisis. We have 2.1, the destruction of democracy. On 30th January 1933, President Hindenburg offered the chancellorship, the highest position in the cabinet of ministers, to Hitler. By now, the Nazis had managed to rally the conservatives to their cause. By now the Nazis had managed to rally the conservatives to their cause. Having acquired power, Hitler set out to dismantle the structure of democratic rule. A mysterious fire that broke out in the German parliament building in February facilitated his move. The Fire Decree of 28 February 1933 infinitely suspended civic rights like freedom of speech, press, and assembly that had been guaranteed by the Weimar Constitution. The Fire Decree of 28 February 1933 indefinitely suspended civic rights like freedom of speech, press, and assembly that had been guaranteed by the Weimar Constitution. Then he turned on his arch enemies, the communists, most of whom were hurriedly packed off to the newly established concentration camps. The repression of the communists was severe. Out of the surviving 6,808 arrest files of Düsseldorf, a small city of 500,000 population, 1,440 were those of communists alone. There were, however, only one among the 52 types of victims persecuted by the Nazis across the country. On 3rd March 1933, the famous Enabling Act was passed. On 3rd March 1933, the famous Enabling Act was passed. This act established dictatorship in Germany. It gave Hitler all powers to sideline parliament and rule by decree. All political parties and trade unions were banned except for the Nazi Party and its affiliates. All the political parties and trade unions, they were all banned except those who were affiliated to the Nazi Party. The state established complete control over the economy, media, army, and judiciary. Special surveillance and security forces were created to control and order society in ways that the Nazis wanted. Apart from the already existing regular police in green uniform and the SA or the storm troopers, SA or the storm troopers, these included the Gestapo, secret state police, and the SS, the protection squads, criminal police, and the security service, SD. It was the extra constitutional powers of these newly organized forces that gave Nazi state its reputation as the most dreaded criminal state. So, apart from already existing regular police in green uniform, the SA, or the stormtroopers. These included the Gestapo, secret state police, the SS, the protection squads, criminal police, and the security service SD. It was the extra constitutional powers of these newly organized forces that gave the Nazi state its reputation as the most dreaded criminal state. People could now be detained in Gestapo torture chambers, rounded up and sent to concentration camps, deported at will, or arrested without any legal procedures. The police forces acquired powers to rule with impunity. So, what are the concentration camps? A camp where people were isolated and detained without due process of law. Typically, it was surrounded by electrified barbed wire fences. So, it was like a prison. 2.2 Reconstruction. Hitler assigned the responsibility of economic recovery to the economist Hjalmar Sachs. So he gave the responsibility to an economist who aimed at full production and full employment through a state funded work creation program. This project produced the famous German superhighways and the people's car, the Volkswagen. So this project produced the famous German superhighways and the people's car, the Volkswagen. So figure 10. Figure 10, here's a picture of the poster announces your Volkswagen. Such posters suggested that owning a car was no longer just a dream for an ordinary worker. In foreign policy also, Hitler acquired quick successes. He pulled out of the League of Nations. So Germany pulled out of the League of Nations in 1933, reoccupied the Rhineland in 1936, and integrated Austria and Germany in 1938 under the slogan "One people, one empire, and one leader." He then went on to wrest German-speaking Sudetenland from Czechoslovakia and gobbled up the entire country. So he then went on to the wrest German-speaking Sudetenland from Czechoslovakia and gobbled up the entire country. In all of this, he had the unspoken support of England, which had considered the Versailles verdict too harsh. These quick successes at home and abroad seemed to reverse the destiny of the country. Hitler did not stop there. Sachs had advised Hitler against investing hugely in rearmament as the state still ran on deficit financing. Cautious people, however, had no place in Nazi Germany. Sachs had to leave, so Hitler fired him. Hitler chose war as the way out of the approaching economic crisis. So what did Hitler do? Hitler chose war as the way out of the approaching economic crisis. So here we have a map. Expansion of Nazi power, Europe 1942. So this is the expansion of Germany. Resources were to be accumulated through expansion of territories. In September 1939, Germany invaded Poland. So, next one is Germany invaded Poland. This started a war with France and England. In September 1940, a tripartite pact was signed between Germany, Italy, and Japan, strengthening Hitler's claim to international power. Puppet regimes supportive of Nazi Germany were installed in a large part of Europe. By the end of 1940, Hitler was at the pinnacle of his power. Hitler now moved to achieve his long-term aim of conquering Eastern Europe. He wanted to ensure food supplies and living space for Germans. He attacked the Soviet Union in June 1941. In this historic blunder, Hitler exposed the German Western Front to British aerial bombing and the Eastern Front to the powerful Soviet armies. The Soviet Red Army inflicted a crushing and humiliating defeat on Germany at Stalingrad. So what happens was that the Nazi they did a historic blunder and exposed the German Western Front to British aerial bombing and Eastern Front to the powerful Soviet armies. So they had war at two fronts. The Soviet Red Army inflicted a crushing and humiliating defeat on Germany at Stalingrad. After this, the Soviet Red Army hounded out the retreating army soldiers until they reached the heart of Berlin, establishing Soviet hegemony over the entire Eastern Europe for half a century thereafter. Meanwhile, the USA had resisted involving in the war. It was unwilling to once again face all the economic problems that the First World War had caused. But it could not stay out of the war for long. Japan was expanding its power in the East. It had occupied French Indochina and was planning attacks on US naval bases. So what was happening is that the Japan they had occupied French Indochina and was planning to attack US naval bases in the Pacific. When Japan extended its support to Hitler and bombed the US base at Pearl Harbor, the US entered the Second World War. So what prompted US to enter the Second World War? It was the bombing of the US base at Pearl Harbor by Japan. The war ended in May 1945 with Hitler's defeat and the US bombing of and US dropping of the atom bomb on Hiroshima in Japan. From this brief account of what happened in the Second World War, we now return to Helmut and his father's story, a story of Nazi criminality during the war. So here we study the brief account of what happened in the Second World War. And so we now return to Helmut and his father's story, a story of Nazi criminality during the war. Okay, so here is figure 12. Here, so many newspaper clippings. Newspapers in India track the developments in Germany. So that's all guys. See you in my next video. Bye.